Kong began as a concept in 2009 when a couple of friends rented a garage and started building. But today, over 10 trillion API calls per month. The most popular API gateway on GitHub with more than 67,000 stars. 300 million Kong gateway downloads and counting. We couldn't have achieved this without you. You contributed thousands of lines of code each year. You've championed Kong across the world. And you've connected with each other across more than 80 meetup groups on every major continent. Help us continue to innovate and improve the world of APIs. Get involved today at konghq.com/community. Kong, by developers, for developers.
Let's go. Yep. Isn't it great to hear stories from real customers here at Kong Summit? Last month, my wife and I had to buy a new car. The old one broke down, and we have a family, 2 beautiful kids, 2 boys. And if you ever purchase the car, you know how hard it can be. There are so many options out there. Some cars are faster, some are bigger, some are smaller. And hey, I'm Italian. I like fast cars. My wife, she's from Kentucky. She's more practical. And so in order to be able to navigate and make all these options and make the right choice, we decided to sit down. We decided about what we were going to do with the car, who would use the car, where we were going with the car. And we needed a family car, a daily driver, something that we could use to buy groceries, brings the kids to school, the regular stuff. And so we decided to buy an SUV. It's good, it's comfy, works great, but with a sports package, so I can have my 5 seconds of joy on the freeway. And just like that, the dilemma was solved. This is a tough process that each one of us makes whenever we have to make an important decision. We always think about what we're going to be doing with the car, with a house, what is the vision that we have, and then we work backwards from there to make sure we make the right choice. But the dilemma is that more often than not, people make short-term decisions when it comes to APIs, whereas we should think of an API strategy and then work backwards from there to implement it. The responsibility for thinking long-term in any organization always falls on the shoulders of the leaders of the organization. APIs are running our business. Everything that we create, every product, anything that anybody's building in the organization is powered by APIs. APIs are some of the most important assets in our applications. And so if we do have a vision for our business and how our business will evolve in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we must have a vision for APIs to be able to support our business execution in the next 3, 4, 5 years. As a result of that, API strategy really needs to be leveled up to a new level. Without APIs, all that we have left are silos. APIs allow us to create a door to every piece of information, to every service, any data that our teams are creating. APIs allow us to break down the silos. It's not a surprise that breaking down the silos is a cross-team effort. It's something that affects the whole organization, every line of business. And as a matter of fact, it's not a surprise that one of the biggest API visions we've seen in our industry, Amazon, a great API-first organization, was actually driven by the CEO himself, Jeff Bezos, with the famous Jeff Bezos mandate. What Jeff Bezos said was the following. His vision was about making sure that every team built an API first and foremost, and that every API would be able to be exposed immediately, potentially, to a third party. And thanks to this API vision, Amazon grew 16,000%, and AWS was made possible. AWS, which, by the way, many of you in this room are relying upon to build your business and run your business. You see, Amazon was not the first e-commerce company in the world, but it was the first one with a strong business vision and a strong API vision. Today, Amazon, AWS, it's a $100 billion business for Amazon. That would not have been possible without an API vision. The real risk is that as you execute on your business, there is going to be a competitor with a stronger API vision that can eat our lunch, that we cannot allow that to happen. We have to act now and think about how we're going to be building an API vision for the entire organization. And so what is your API vision? How are we going to be supporting the business? How are we going to be supporting the innovation? It's not a surprise that organizations with a strong API vision are the ones that can ship faster, that can execute with more agility. Those are the ones that can turn products into platforms, into ecosystems, that can foster innovation and creativity. This is no longer someone else's job. As we develop our API vision, we really have to start from the applications. At the end of the day, this is what our developers are doing. APIs started as an afterthought, as an add-on on top of our monolithic applications back in the days. We have our monolithic applications. We want to support new use cases, mobile, and we go ahead and build an API to make that happen. But this was still done in a very opportunistic way. Whereas API, it is true that they started from the applications themselves, but they ended up being a very important part of the entire organization. Every major transformation to the cloud, digital transformations, creating ecosystems, onboarding customers, all of these transformations are driven by APIs. APIs, they move the organization forward. They help us achieve our business outcomes in a much better way. Without a coherent API vision, we're not going to be strategic like this. We're going to be tactical, opportunistic. But that's not what the business needs. The business needs a strategy that we can execute upon. Technology is very important. Whatever we put in place, whatever platform we use to build and execute on our vision needs to be able to support all the teams throughout their journey. Some teams are running on technologies that are not so new, and some others are transitioning into this new world of containers and Kubernetes and containerized applications that we need to be able to support. The right API platform is the one that allows us to create a framework where we can still drive to those business outcomes and yet being able to make the teams happy, make them fast whenever they're building anything in the organization. If we fail to do that, then these teams are going to be checking out. And as they check out, slowly but surely, our outcomes are getting harder and harder to achieve. That's why we want to provide a platform to the teams, a platform that allows them to self-serve their policies so they can do all the experimentation that they need to do without sacrificing the business outcomes that we want to drive. And this is why most of these people here in this room, most of you, are actually partnering with Kong to build this API platform, one that can help us drive both the teams and the business outcomes together. Some of you may think that the time is not right to build an API platform for the organization. But I challenge you to think about understanding that the time is always right. APIs are not going anywhere. APIs are only going to be increasing moving forward. The more applications and the more things and customer experiences that we build, and the more APIs we're going to be having. And so we need a strategy today to be able to support that growth in an organized way. So let's go build an API platform and vision today here in this room. And let's start with what the teams are doing. Our teams are transitioning from monolithic to microservices. With a monolithic application, we have external traffic, mobile applications, ecosystem of developers that we want to enable to consume our APIs. But as we transition to microservices, and by the way, this is a transition that I've done myself as an API developer. As we transition from monolithic to microservices, we focus on the workloads, but there is lots of API connectivity in between all the services that we also need to deal with. And the application teams are unprepared to deal with that because that's not part of their job. It is the underlying infrastructure that should make that connectivity reliable and secure. And so we can adopt an API gateway to expose some of these services externally, outside of the organization, or internally to other teams. And yet we still want to have something in place that makes all of that API connectivity among our services reliable, secure, and observable. And for that, we can adopt a service mesh. Service mesh turns our API connectivity into electricity. When we're home and we want to plug in an appliance, it just works. It's there, ready to go. And this is exactly how we're turning our API connectivity for our teams. We're turning that unreliable connectivity into electricity, always up and running, always ready to go. Now we can support our teams faster. They can ship faster because they're not worrying about all these cross-cutting concerns that they need to think about when they build microservices. But then finally, we could have the best API infrastructure in the world, and yet if there is no consumption, all of this is useless. The value of any API platform, it is being driven by the consumption and the usage that our APIs have. And so we need to make sure that our teams are productive, they can design APIs the right way, they can discover and consume APIs the right way, they can be successful in their transformation. This is the API vision. And this is the API platform. A platform that can cover the entire lifecycle with the teams, the modern applications and the old ones, in order for us to be able to support them all, not in a silo, but in an organized way, sharing all these capabilities among them. But how about this? Don't hear it from me. Let's invite on stage Gaurav Dasan, lead cloud architect of TransUnion, to tell you how they're building an API platform for the organizations with Kong's technology. Welcome, Gaurav. Thank you. All right, fantastic, Gaurav. Thanks so much for being here. Okay, so let's get going. Let's understand what type of transformations is TransUnion doing today?
TransUnion is on a multi-year cloud journey. As part of this effort, we are modernizing the way we do technology at TransUnion.
That's fantastic. And so how are you using Kong's technology to help with this outcome?
Yeah, so Kong is a strategic partner in that cloud transformation. We use Kong API Gateway and Service Mesh solutions. I lead the Service Mesh effort, so I'll talk specifically about Service Mesh. As part of our cloud transformation journey, we are not just shifting apps to the cloud. We are making our monolithic applications, we are breaking the monolith and making them more cloud native and microservices oriented. As the sheer number of these microservices grow, so does the complexity of our system. And we believe that Kong Mesh can help alleviate some of those cross-cutting concerns and complexity, especially when we execute or run those microservices in a distributed environment such as Kubernetes.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so by doing so, what type of business outcomes do you think you're going to be able to achieve?
Sure, that's a good question. I will talk about the technology outcomes first, and then I will try to relate them to the business outcomes. So we plan to use, and we use Service Mesh for some of the technology features, namely MTLS for Zero Trust. We are using Canary. We are achieving the Canary deployment with Flagger integration from Service Mesh. The observability feature of like the matrix that the data plane emits out of the box helps us make sense of our system. It helps us to observe our system for performance as well as the overall health of the system. So that's the technology piece of it. Now, as part of our cloud transformation journey, an important goal is to provide the right set of tools to our product engineers so that they can build meaningful products for our customers and consumers. Now, Kong Mesh is one of those tools because it helps the product engineers to focus on building meaningful apps and reduces the burden on the shoulder of our product engineers so that the Kong Mesh software can take all of the complexity in its own hand and makes our application lightweight. So by adopting a solution like Service Mesh and Kong Mesh, it helps us to move faster. It makes our engineers more agile and more focused on building application. It makes our applications lightweight, and it de-risks our transformation. It makes our transformation smoother. So these are all the business outcomes. And less burden on engineers' shoulder translates to money saved, I would say.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this resonates with many of you here in this room.
True.
No, this is fantastic, Gaurav. Thank you so much for telling us what TransUnion is doing and how you're doing it. This is very compelling. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so we need to build an API platform, one that the teams can use to be fast and successful and self-service, while at the same time, we want to make sure that we can have the right tools in place to observe the advancements of our business outcomes. I told you before, I was an API developer myself, and so throughout the journey to microservices, there are many things that developers have to think about that are really slowing them down if it's not being given by the underlying infrastructure. As we transition to microservices, some of these requirements is about making sure the network is secure, making sure that we can observe and trace and change all of our infrastructure in a meaningful way so that when there is a problem, we can track it, so that when there is a bug, we can identify it. We need to make sure that all of these cross-cutting concerns are there for us to make sure that these services are going to be successful. And it's very frantic and it's very chaotic. And this is all extra work that as an API developer, I don't want to do. It's not my job. And so what if we could take all of these cross-cutting concerns and we could make it suiting? We could bring them inside the underlying infrastructure. We could leave them away from our teams and bring them inside the service mesh. Now, if we were to do that, all of these cross-cutting concerns are going to go away. As a team, I can execute fast, knowing that all of this is taken care of for me. But we're not done yet. Whenever we bake all of these cross-cutting concerns into a Cycle proxy, like in this example, we still have lots of configuration that we need to push and we need to enable in order to define what is the behavior that our infrastructure should operate with. And what if even this could be baked away into a control plane, a centralized place, a source of truth for our configuration that allows us to manage in one place all of this infrastructure across any team and every organization. And that's why we've built Kong Mesh. Kong Mesh is a service mesh that allows us to provide modern API connectivity and a modern service mesh across every team in the organization, while still keeping control of the business outcomes that we want to achieve. By providing a service mesh, we heard it from Gaurav, we can build faster. Our teams don't have to worry about these things. They can be more agile because they're self-service. We can support more reliable connections. If our connections are down, the applications are down. So how do we make sure that the uptime is always going, that these experiences are reliable? And this is exactly what the service mesh helps us doing. I find it very hard to be able to transition to microservices and yet not taking care of these underlying API connectivity. Now, when it comes to service mesh, one of the biggest questions I hear from customers, as a matter of fact, these actually happened yesterday. We were having a customer advisory board with some of you, and one of the questions was, how do we differentiate a service mesh versus API management? What's the difference? So let's take a look at that. Every service that our teams create are services. Anything that can make or receive a request over the network is a service. So the services we build are services, and the services we adopt, like databases, like Kafka, those are also services. Therefore, an API management solution is also a service because it receives a request, does some operation, and proxy those requests elsewhere. Service mesh and API management are fundamentally operating on different levels of our infrastructure. Service mesh makes sure that our connections are reliable, like electricity. They're always working, they're always secure, they're always observable. But then on top of that, our services, like an API management solution, can bring added capabilities for choosing which one of these services we want to expose, and then being able to provide a curated experience for an internal team or an external customer to be able to get access to these API and start making requests. So we can manage tiers of consumers, we can manage how we want them to secure the API or log into the API. We can build all sorts of capabilities that are higher in the stack than the service mesh. The service mesh makes sure that at the end of the day, everything that's running underneath is going to be working. And so with Kong Mesh, really we want to provide this type of reliable infrastructure across every team, the modern ones, the new ones that are creating the cool things, but also the ones that are managing and running the business today on more legacy technology. And so it's built in such a way that since day one, it can support modern containerized environments, but it can also support single or multi-cloud environments, as well as virtual machines. Now, when it comes to a service mesh, there are three things that matter. One is performance. If our services are slow, the application customer experience is going to be very poor. The retention of our customers is going to decrease. Then it's control, being able to give the right amount of control to the teams to move fast and yet do that within guardrails and boundaries that we set up for them, as well as accountability to make sure that as the whole organization is changing configuration across the board, we exactly know who did what, and potentially that helps us fix problems faster. And this is why today I'm very excited to announce a new release of Kong Mesh 2.0. Kong Mesh 2.0 allows us to improve each one of these different categories, performance, control, and accountability. Built on top of Kuma 2.0, Kong Mesh is a service mesh for the entire organization. And so with Kong Mesh 2.0, our applications are 12% faster because we're leveraging eBPF. It's a new modern networking technology for Linux environments that allows us to essentially accelerate connectivity across the board. This is a no-brainer. The faster they are, the better our applications will become. It allows us to improve control with a new generation of policy selectors that are easier to use, that everybody in the team, in the organization can adopt, and also allows us to set up top governance capabilities that we want to mandate, like, for example, every application should be zero trust, and still give the ability to the teams to be able to change their own things, the ones that we want them to have the freedom to change, like circuit breakers or routing, for example. And then finally, we are shipping a new capability for our back auditing logs. And this is quite important for always knowing what's happening in our infrastructure as we support teams across every line of business. But again, don't hear it from me. I'd like to invite on stage John Harris, who is the product leader for Kong Mesh and Kuma. John, welcome on board. All right, as John sets himself up and the demonstration up, we're going to be seeing something that's quite unique and quite complex. John is going to be demonstrating a service mesh that truly can support every team in the organization. This is a multi-cloud, hybrid, VMs and containers demonstration. We're going to be seeing how our teams can be productive with something like this without having to build it from scratch. So all of these underlying API connectivity is ready to use. They become the users of this functionality, not the builders of this functionality. John, all yours.
All right, let's take it away. I made a deal with all the other presenters that I'd take all the technical problems for the team, so... All right. And one more.
You're now setting up your multi-zone demonstration.
Yep. Let me just find what I'm looking for. There we go. All right, perfect. So thank you, Marco. I'm going to spend the next 5 or so minutes just talking through some of the great capabilities of Kong Mesh and how those features can enable business outcomes for your organizations at lower cost. So before I used to be a PM, before I was a PM on Kong Mesh, I used to be in the field helping customers. And one of the things I always used to hear was, when I'm building a robust platform, one of the most important things I need, like Marco said, is a mesh which can span running any application across any cloud, across any environment. And that's why one of the key decisions we made when designing Kong Mesh was to make it completely platform agnostic. We can support your workloads on virtual machines, on-prem or in the cloud. We can support containerized workloads on things like EKS and GKE, and also newer innovative technologies like AWS ECS and Fargate, for example. So I'm going to bring up my demo app here. Let's see what we got going. All right, moment of truth. There we go. So I have a demo app running here. It's 2 components. I have a front-end Node.js application, and it's hitting a Redis cache in the back end. Now, I have an instance of the front end and an instance of the Redis cache across an EKS cluster. I have another instance in GKE clusters, and another instance on virtual machines in EC2. So I can connect all of these different zones in a single plane mesh to enable all my applications to talk cross-cloud seamlessly. So let's take a look at my Kong Mesh Manager here. There we go.
Yeah, we're exposing all the ports and all the services so we can get access to them. This is running in the cloud, right, John?
Yep, this is running across all 3 clouds. So I have my control plane in AWS, I have zones in AWS, zones in Google, zones all over the place. So I'm going to go to my zone control planes here, and we can actually see that, right? We can see I have an EKS zone, a GKE zone, a couple of other offline Kubernetes zones, and then that universal zone in virtual machines. So by supporting all of these platforms in a seamless way, like Marco said, we can take away all of those cross-cutting concerns and let your development teams do what they love to do, which is develop, right? This in turn accelerates the agility within your organization, and they can just focus on doing innovation and enabling business outcomes. And they don't need to worry about those kind of operational pieces, right? Developers never care about doing stuff with infrastructure. And in fact, those great demos by Augie and Gabriella reminded me this morning, we use Kong Mesh in Connect. We use Kong Mesh to enable MTLS end-to-end security for all of our internal services in Connect. We issue certificates, automatically rotate them on a configurable interval, and that massively reduces exposure in the case of leaks and things like that. It means that we have that end-to-end security. Our developers don't have to worry about that. They can just focus on delivering all those great Connect services that we saw earlier. And we can actually see that in the UI. If we head over here to our TLS report, looking at my Mesh A, we can see I have an enabled backend, which is a built-in certificate authority, which comes with Kong Mesh. Now, we know that organizations also have their own certificate authorities or want to integrate with other third parties and have different regulatory requirements. So we also natively integrate with a number of other third-party providers, HashiCorp Vault, AWS Certificate Manager, and more.
We can essentially enable zero trust in one click. Everything is encrypted, and everything has an identity.
So security is great, and obviously usually top of mind, right? One of Augie's 3 pillars. But another huge benefit to deploying Kong Mesh is the unparalleled observability you get by, like I said, sitting next to each application, taking away those cross-cutting concerns. We can give logging, monitoring, tracing. We can capture everything coming out of every application. This allows you to anticipate issues in your environments and mitigate them early, right? Making sure that you're always giving your customers the best experience when they're running their apps in your environments. So in Kong Mesh, we provide native integration with some of the best cloud-native tooling. So I'm going to head over here and bring up my Grafana dashboard. Grafana is the latest best-in-breed kind of monitoring tool. So let's go refresh this.
All of this work and all of these cross-cutting concerns would be quite complicated to build. This is the right infrastructure that supports our teams in the type of journey that they're doing with microservices. Microservices are not successful if these type of capabilities are not being given to them. We don't want them to build them, we want them to use them.
All right, there we go. So in my Grafana dashboard, we ship a number of different pre-built-in configurations so that you can see all the kind of things that you might care about. So let's go and take a look at my service-to-service view. Here, I can take a look at, let's just take a look at the last few hours here. There we go, let's do 6 hours. I'm gonna choose which applications I wanna view metrics for, right? So we have very granular observability here. So if I choose my demo app and then my Redis backend, I can see here I get information about connection time, the bytes sent between the applications. I can even go and take a look at the individual service. You can take a look and see my Redis service. I can see the number of incoming and outgoing requests, the traffic going to this, and I can drill down to any of those services across any of those clouds through a single dashboard. Now, we also ship a custom plugin for Grafana, which gives you a visual mapping of all these services in your environment. So I'm going to take a look at my mesh dashboard, and we can actually see we've got different applications running here, and this live updates, right? This is dynamic. So as this traffic, if I start getting 500s or I start getting 400s, these quadrants will update and show me maybe the red quadrant or show me how many requests are failing, and then I can dig into that. Obviously, I only have a couple of services in this environment, but you can imagine once this is a sprawling environment across multiple clouds, this kind of view and being able to dig into exactly where the issues are is super useful.
John, does Kong Mesh support multi-tenancy, so I can provision meshes for multiple teams?
Absolutely, and that's one of the main ways that customers actually, sometimes we'll have an app per namespace, an app per cluster, but a lot of folks want to use multi-tenancy within a cluster, and we can provision a mesh per team. And like we talked about earlier, because that certificate authority root of trust is mesh specific, we can ensure that if you have a tenant in a single mesh, they can't talk to anyone in another mesh without explicit permission to do so.
That's fantastic.
Okay, so we've seen some of the high-level operational and kind of business value you get with Kong Mesh, but developers are a big part of the organization. So let's dive a layer deeper and take a look at some of the features we can enable for our teams to be more comfortable and efficient with their service mesh technology. So as a developer, I love that security is baked in for me. Like I said, our Connect team came to me and said, we just switched MTLS on, it literally took 5 seconds. We budgeted like 3 weeks, we don't know what to do now, right? But these kind of platforms can often lock me down as well, right? So if I have a platform comes in, usually it's kind of heavyweight. Now developers don't have a lot of autonomy to do what they want. They always have to submit tickets. With Kong Mesh, we provide a very granular, powerful, and flexible role-based access control so that central teams can set guidelines and permission access scopes for their teams, but then push down so developers can have as much self-service as possible. So let's go back to our Kong Mesh UI here, and I'm going to jump down to access control. And we'll see for my dev A mesh, right, I have 2 meshes in this environment, I have an access role saying the dev A developer can create, delete, and update traffic permissions and rate limits, which are 2 of the policies that we offer for Kong Mesh. I also have another rule, which is down here. Again, they can create, delete, and update, but this time a slightly wider, broad set of policies, so traffic route, health checking, circuit breaking. But in this, I'm being more specific in my condition and saying they can only do this when the source is one app and the destination is themselves. So we can be very granular about who can choose permissions, rate limiting, health checking between individual services, and give app teams a lot of capability to do that. So let's actually see that in action. I'm going to jump over to my global control plane in my terminal here, and I'm going to log in as, let's say I want to apply a rate limit to Mesh B, but I'm going to log in as a developer on the Mesh A team. Now let's see what happens when I hit enter. Nope, it's going to tell me.
Also, with this, we can set up guardrails and decide what is the degree of self-service that we want to enable to our teams. And each team may be different.
Absolutely. Every organization has a slightly different structure with their dev teams, and very granular we can set that up. So I'm going to go and try and apply this rate limit as a developer for Mesh A, and it's going to say, whoa, can't do that, right? I'm not authenticated. But let's say now I'm going to log in as a developer for Mesh B and hit enter. We're going to see that Kong Mesh is going to evaluate all of those rules, and we'll say rate limit applied, right? So I can be very granular, not only between meshes, right? So we might want to use that as the agent of tenancy, but I can also be very granular within a mesh. If I just have a service, multiple services within a mesh, one service team can have granular permissions on one service and not another. So we've talked about locking down access for our developers themselves. What about the applications, right? If I develop the billing application, I might want to ensure that only a few different other applications can hit me, but I don't want to open up access to my whole environment, right? So let's take a look at our CongMesh UI again. I'm going to head down to traffic permissions. So traffic permissions is a policy that a lot of folks tend to use. And I have a traffic permission in here which says that, let's go to my YAML. I have a traffic permission which says all services can talk to all other services. So when I go back to my demo, we can see, if I hit my demo again, auto increment this, we're hitting all of those different backends, right? We're balancing between AKS, GKE, and the VMs. I'm going to go ahead and delete that traffic permission. So let's go delete traffic permission, allow all in dev A. So once that goes through and CongMesh pushes that out to all of our data planes, we can see, we're starting to get errors in our front end, right? We've now taken away the permission for our Node.js front end to talk to our Redis backend across the entire mesh. This kind of capability is extremely powerful. Now let's set this back up again because we want to put that traffic back. And again, once this is applied and pushed out to all of our data planes, we'll start seeing that our application instantly starts connecting and is rebalancing traffic. So the simplicity and flexibility that CongMesh allows you to control traffic at layer 4 and layer 7 means your development teams, again, can spend minimal time setting this stuff up, right? And it enables them to deliver a much better, faster experience to their partners and customers. Now, we also may want to be a little bit more efficient with this app. This front end is running in EKS, but I'm balancing all of my traffic between all of these clouds, probably incurring, egress costs, right, or latency. Within CongMesh, we have very granular routing capabilities. I can choose that all the traffic in my EKS zone should stay within my EKS zone. I already have a Redis in that back end. So what I'm going to use here is a feature called locality-aware load balancing. So I'm going to go ahead and get our mesh object, pull that down here, and I'm going to edit and just enable that routing feature. So let's go ahead and edit my mesh object. I'm going to go down here. We have a routing section. We're going to go locality, aware, load, balancing, true. Make sure I spelled that right. Save that. Now I'm going to go and apply those settings back up to my mesh. And again, as soon as that takes effect, goes into my global control plane, is pushed down to all of my data planes, we'll see my EKS front end is now only hitting my EKS backend, getting rid of all that egress traffic costs, getting rid of all that latency. So as a developer, I want to be able to get up and running quickly with as little complexity as possible, but while also having the freedom to experiment and change routing and change security like this. CongMesh is the only cross-cloud, cross-environment application service mesh that doesn't trade simplicity for flexibility and is going to help you deliver faster, more efficient software. What we've seen over the last few minutes is only scratching the surface of the possibilities with CongMesh. And that opens up you as organizations to deliver better software faster. Back to Marco.
All right, thank you, John. I mean, this is fantastic. This is a control plane for every application that we're building. And just like that, we can manage it in a multi-cloud, multi-tenant way. Do you know what this is? This is the real-world picture of an API that nobody uses. We could have the best multi-cloud, the best gateway, the best mesh. We could have the best infrastructure in the world. And like I told you before, if nobody consumes it, all of this is useless. The value is being driven by the usage that we can generate on our APIs. And how do we incentivize our teams to discover and consume APIs? Well, we need to talk about API productivity. I was an API developer myself. Sometimes, a manager would say, hey, go ahead and build this application and just use this API. Well, but just using another API, it's actually many steps. It's getting familiarized with an API, start testing the API, and then eventually integrating this API. There is a lot that goes into it. And that's why API productivity, if we had to unpack it, it's about API debugging, it's about API mocking, testing, it's about making sure that we can design APIs the proper way. And then once we have everything configured, making sure that we can use practices like API ops to push all of our configuration. into our infrastructure. And of course, because we're not working in a silo, API productivity, it's also about API collaboration. We want to make sure that we can work with our team members as we build and design and consume APIs. Failure to do so and failure to provide an API productivity strategy to our teams, it's like giving a dull knife to a surgeon. They're not going to be able to operate. It doesn't cut, right? It needs to be there so that our teams can be productive. Failure to do so means that there is lots of coordination that now it's required. The APIs are incompatible. The APIs are not reliable. The APIs are not tested. The APIs are breaking. Whereas with the right API productivity tool, we can fix all of these use cases. Again, it's a very suiting place to be versus a chaotic place to be. If we make our teams productive, our APIs will look like this. Now, everybody wants them. The API productivity product at Kong, it's called Insomnia. Many of you have actually told me in our customer conversations that perhaps you already have an API productivity tool, but the teams are complaining. It's bloated, it's not extensible, it's too expensive. And so with Insomnia, Kong is providing an opportunity to have the same flexibility as every other product, the gateway and the mesh, but in the API productivity world. And this is why today I'm very excited to announce a new major release of Insomnia. This one ships with amazing new capabilities that I'm going to cover in just a second. By the way, for those of you who wonder, what does Insomnia mean? Well, it means that our APIs should never sleep because they're always being requested, always being consumed. But we should sleep. All right, this new version of Insomnia ships with WebSockets support. WebSockets are notoriously hard to consume. With Insomnia, this process is one click. We can test and consume and debug RESTful APIs, gRPC APIs, GraphQL APIs, and today, WebSocket APIs. Many of you wanted to leverage Insomnia across the organization, and so I'm happy to announce that today we're introducing a new enterprise tier for Insomnia, which means that now we can enable this API productivity across the board with an enterprise partnership with Kong. Likewise, we do for the gateway and for the service mesh and for our cloud platform. And then finally, I'm going to give you a small preview of what's coming in Insomnia. In early 2023, we're going to be shipping a new major version of Insomnia. And this one will ship with many enterprise integrations for RBAC and SSO, as well for auto-documentation of our APIs. We all know that nobody wants to document APIs. As a matter of fact, yesterday at the Customer Advisory Board, APIs that are not documented have been identified as one of the most critical problems that prevents the reuse of APIs in our organizations. If they're not documented, nobody wants to use them. And so with Insomnia in early 2023, we're going to be able to provide automatically generated suggestions for documentations for each endpoint and each API. But again, I would like you to see a live demonstration of this product. And so please welcome on stage Kat Morgan, Senior Developer Advocate at Kong, who will give you a live demonstration of what Insomnia can do. Welcome, Kat.
Marco, thank you for bringing me on. All right, so you were talking about car shopping, and that reminds me, I bought my last car earlier this year with my phone, and they brought it to my door. I'm telling you, APIs.
Now you tell me?
APIs are the future. Okay, so as Marco said, I'm Kat Morgan, but today I would invite you to imagine with me that I am a developer crucial to your success. So I am in your business on your developer team, and we've just undertaken a new initiative together. I want to get started and show how Insomnia can power that development. All right, so on this first screen of Insomnia, this is my local development dashboard. And from here, I can create things that belong to me, whether I'm discovering new APIs or creating new ones. But if I'm working with collaboratively with a team, I need to jump into something that we can all share together. So I'm going to show how my Insomnia development team and I communicate with different tests across different API endpoints. And I actually don't think I have what I wanted to show you. So I'm going to jump into our sync account, and I'm actually going to pull down what I wanted to show right off the bat. Because Marco, you said that WebSockets are hard, but I disagree. So check this out. So right here, I have a really basic gRPC. Actually, we're going to go jump into Coinbase, everyone's hot topic right now. And I'm going to connect to this WebSocket. But at first, it's going to error out. And why is that? That's because with this WebSocket setup, I can specify what environment I want to target. And now that I have chosen one, the address environment variable populates, and now I can connect. So now that my WebSocket is connected, down here in this central pane, this is where I compose the body of the messages that I want to send. And here we're just subscribing to a ticker. So we're going to send that body.
If you own some crypto, you may not like what you're seeing right now, given the current market conditions, but just giving you a heads up.
Yeah, I hope this isn't going to hurt you personally today. But now we're receiving the live messages from this WebSocket. And down below, you can actually start exploring the body of the messages that you're receiving, as well as jumping into different headers and the actual logs produced by the client while it's retrieving these messages. So all of that was just discovery and exploring an API that you have access to. But what if it is time for me to go ahead and start creating? And that's where Insomnia gives me other opportunities to design and develop my own spec. So this is what this document shows. Now, on the left, you'll see that I have navigation opportunity. Actually, I'm going to jump to this design tab up here and expand the design organization. So this is where I can define what servers and endpoint paths that I can hit, and shows me the schemas that I'm designing for those endpoints. On the top, in the right, you can see that I have access to my OpenAPI spec to design that and write it live here. And every change that I make is going to immediately render as different, as the actual documentation that other developers will use to consume my API.
What you see is what you get.
Exactly. So it's not just for reading either. So you can hit the try it out and have an executable and interactive documentation. You can trade that with other people you haven't converted to Insomnia yet with basic curl commands that explain what you're doing, see the body of your request, and this just is the beginning of unlocking. Now, I'm going to jump to the testing automation really quick before we close out. And hopefully, if I've done all of my development work and designed my tests correctly, all of these tests will pass with flying colors, and I won't have Insomnia tonight. Marco. Okay, well, that is the end of my segment. So, Marco, you have a lot of luck with those error messages.
All right, thank you, Kat. Okay, fantastic. Today, we walked through the importance of needing an API vision and transform our business with an API platform, one that can drive an API outcome on top of our business execution. That's very important. Then we've seen how bottom-up we can support our teams, accelerate them by leveraging Kong Mesh with a modern service mesh. And finally, how we can make our teams more productive with Insomnia. All right, so without any further ado, we have a day full of sessions. Let's go build the nervous system for APIs. Thank you so much.